Welcome to the Mawazo Ideas podcast, where we delve into the inspiring journeys and groundbreaking research of African women researchers shaping the future of the continent. Previously known as the Nairobi Ideas podcast, the Mawazo Ideas podcast goes beyond the research, featuring untold stories from brilliant African women researchers from across the continent. We delve into their everyday realities, their challenges and triumphs, and the solutions they are pioneering for a brighter African future. So tune in every week to explore their innovative ideas, discuss their impact on the continent's development, and celebrate African women's contribution to academia, innovation, and society at large.
Welcome back to this episode of the Mawazo Ideas podcast. I am Caroline Mose, the Director of Programs at the Mawazo Institute. And today I am joined on this episode by Professor Wandia Njoya, our educator, public intellectual, although I know that term has been overtaken by some other events, but public intellectual and a person we're very privileged to have on this podcast. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Prof.
Thank you.
We stopped the other episode at the point of the university, so I want us to pick up from there. I want us to talk about the university as an ecosystem, the university as a system. And perhaps start a little bit with a little bit of history of the universities to inform why we are where we are today. So I want us to start from there. Let's talk about the university. Yeah.
Okay. At least in Kenya, the universities, unfortunately, the infrastructure was set up by the British. And they did it just before independence. So they were seeing ahead. They were seeing that we need to make sure that the university is running how we want before we leave.
Right.
So what we got at independence, I think, first of all, there was this nationalist thing of the leaders feeling we have no country unless we have a university. So they were not really paying attention to the detail of what is going on in the university. Yeah. And in fact, like Kenya started off with, I think, a white college principal. And throughout the 70s, the students were saying, we want African teachers, African curriculum. Those issues were there even then.
Right.
And then, people like Goge were saying, why do we have an English department? Is it, those politics were there. I think what happened is that because... Okay, the second thing was this Cold War thing. So the Americans were very into our business in terms of university education, and they were keen on preventing alternative ideas besides the American one of capitalism. And so lecturers were kind of, they were being contained up to the 80s. So... although ideas were being contained mainly at the level of lecturers and the radical students, in general, I think Kenya's attitude was, we want manpower, we are training, so we're not going to really pay attention to whether this thing is serving our needs. We'll contain the ideas, but we'll just let the machine go on.
Yeah.
In the 80s and towards the 90s, when the economy starts doing badly, World Bank starts, after the Berlin Wall falls, World Bank says, why should we be funding universities? Then now the problem becomes one of resources. But you see now there's a new generation of Kenyans that have grown up and they are starting to knock on the door. We want university education.
Yeah.
So the balance between empire saying, no, shut it down, and young people saying, no, we want to get in, and then no resources as a way of gradually starving the university to the bare minimum. That's now the mess we are in now. What has happened since, I think, since the new constitution, ironically, what has happened since that, these new presidents we've had, is a cynicism. Before there was a struggle, people are trying to make it better. But since the last decade, there's been a cynicism of, I don't care, let me just get my paper and go. There's so much inefficiencies within the system, missing marks, delayed pay for lecturers, a high bureaucracy, administrative bloat. So those internal problems are what have increased over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say in a nutshell, that's how the
That's
university
the
looks.
state of the university.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back and go back to the original question. What was the original purpose of the university? You know, the European institution. Because if you read Mbembe a little bit, he always insists that everything we see here is a form of mimicry from the West. So what was the original purpose of the university as a mimicry of a European institution?
I'm okay. Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure of the details, but I think there was a break in the Enlightenment period.
Yeah.
Before that, European universities were just centers of learning and propping up the system, the monarchy. So you're just producing, and the church. So you're just producing people who are sustaining the political class and the church. So it was very dominated by the church. Now, when the Enlightenment comes, you start getting these, which is, I think it might have been influenced a lot by the printing press and all that. I'm not sure. But the way I see it, let me just say the way I see it is that with Enlightenment, now you're getting secular, quote unquote, thinkers and scholars who are not attached to the university, to the church, actually. So they are starting to come into their own and produce ideas. But you also have the development of a bourgeoisie, which is people who are making money, but they are not aristocrats. So the combination of those two was able to pull the university away from the church and the monarchy, and together with the revolutions, of course. So they start now producing ideas sort of for the sake of it, nyef, that kind of thing. And now that's the system that we got. So the system that we got is to produce a bourgeoisie who will run the country and run the country on European Enlightenment, imperial ideas.
So more on the monarchy.
No, actually
on the model of the bourgeois.
The bourgeoisie.
Yes.
Because now, even the missionaries who came to educate Africans were educating them to be the middle class bourgeoisie, meaning the people who sustain the system.
But are different and separate from the rulers.
Yes.
Right.
So even the university was formed in that kind of idea, is to produce a class of Africans who may or may not enter politics, but they'll maintain the capitalist state in their countries. So that's generally how the universities were conceptualized. Of course, we must remember Africa had universities before these ones.
Absolutely.
So for African universities, it was just scholarship, knowledge. But now with these ones of the modern one that came in the 60s, it was basically to produce a class of people who would maintain the system in Africa. So that's where we are.
Right.
And, capitalism hates saturation. So I think right now there's a feeling that we have enough educated people for the system. If we have more educated people, they'll start to challenge the system. So we have to reduce the number of people going to universities.
And I think that at some point,
where we are.
I think at some point we even had a conversation in Kenya that we had too many universities.
Yes. Yeah.
Too many. We need to have less. So it was about creating a limited class.
Yes.
A slightly upper class of people.
Yeah.
Separate from the lower classes, the masses.
Yeah.
To uphold the tenets of the ruling class, the rulers and the monarchy, etc., etc.
Yeah, and you see there's a contradiction because now every governor wants a university in their county, but it's for the purpose of that prestige. It's not for the sake of actually educating people to become creative and to thrive. So that's the tension. The tension is that the government can't come out and say openly, we don't want you going to school. But at the same time, they need these institutions for prestige. But you see, once you have people in the institutions, they'll do other things that you don't want.
Of course.
Like having other ideas, being creative and all that. So that's the tension of the university system. Yeah.
And so that tension now finds us where we are right now in the current state of. So we spoke in the previous episode and said that the university system is broken.
Yeah.
How broken is that system? What is that brokenness? How does it manifest?
I think the university has become an industry. It's not an education institution. So we are producing certificates. And a lot of people are coming into the university for social mobility because there's no social mobility, especially in Africa. Commerce is not doing well. Politics is not doing well. All these other sectors are not doing well. The place with the most hope is the education system.
Yeah.
So that's the only hope a lot of people have. So there's more pressure from the public to enter the university because this is the only chance they have. So the source of brokenness is that governments don't want education to happen in universities. The public wants to go to the university for, as a chance. If they get education, for some it's education, others it's the paper. But I think everybody's united in the idea that if I go to university, it expands my chances, my opportunities outside. So that's the clash. We are fighting between a production factory and an education institution. Yeah.
So what does that then mean for our students? Because we are seeing a lot of student protests, a lot of student movements. We are seeing a lot of things. But even before we get there, do we also see, and I think we see that in Kenya, I'm not quite sure about other places on the continent, a lot of the government, as you're saying, every governor wants a university.
Yeah.
But it's also that politicians are also finding some usefulness in politicizing the university as an institution. How does that look like, and what is the result of that kind of politicization of the university system?
One of the things neoliberalism has done, I think actually it's a Western university problem. It's that the universities become an economic and institution in and of themselves. So you build a university somewhere, it's not just the prestige, it's also the jobs for the lecturers, which means rental houses for lecturers and students. Workers who clean also get jobs. So it becomes a financial institution in and of itself.
Yeah.
So what has been happening, especially with the older institutions, is that because they were given land, many acres, politicians are also looking at them now as real estate. So they're looking at the land that these universities sit on, and they are saying they want control of that land. They also want control of grants. If any grants come for a university to do some work, they want control of that kind of money. So that's why politicians are interfering. They're interfering, one, for the prestige, two, for the property that these universities are sitting on, three, for the economics of it, who is getting employed, what jobs are there, that kind of thing. And then four is control of politics, because they realize that university students will probably be the most vocal leaders after finishing. So they need to influence university student politics early, so that you start forming the next group of elites while they are still where they're still in university. And that would explain now, like the Universities Act, where they interfere, they weaponize the student elections, introduced electoral colleges.
Yes, they've done that.
Let me just say, this idea was not mine. It was from Neriba. She said something that stuck with me. She said they are training university students to expect less democracy.
Yes.
Yeah. So that by the time they get out, when you start telling people, oh, we need a prime minister who is not elected, who is not accountable to the people,
It's
university students are already used to that with the electoral colleges. They're already used to bribery and manipulation of student elections. So, you're training them in the corruption of politics that now they will meet when they leave universities. So I think politicians, I'm not saying they do this deliberately. It's an instinct. It's an instinct to pick the next generation of leaders
that they can manipulate as well.
can manipulate. So that's why universities are so important to them.
And then we see, even from the 70s and 80s, we see a lot. We've seen a change from the 70s and 80s into now where we are in terms of even the quality of student leaders.
Yeah.
Back then, student leaders were different. There were now the Orengos and the Matibas and all these people. Now we are seeing things going very differently. How is that looking like? And this is across the continent, actually. How is that looking like? How is that looking like?
Okay, you see, like for Kenya, what has happened is these electoral colleges, which means that the student leader is not chosen by
the majority of the students. They are chosen by
the
delegates.
The delegates.
Yes.
So that means that the students are disconnected from their leaders. And you even hear them saying it. Like sometimes I tell them, this is an administrative problem. Have you talked to to the student government? They're like, those ones, they are not even connected. So we've already started training them to be disconnected from their political leaders. But the second problem is that there's no funding. And so students are hustling to get enough money to sustain themselves. So they're doing other businesses in addition to going to class, if they go to class at all. So there's a combination of students not being as intellectually engaged as before, and two, being disconnected from their leaders. What that means is that the kind of conversations we are hearing from students are depoliticized. And I noticed this during Fees Must Fall, the South African one.
Yes.
I was asking our students, how come these are not conversations you people have? And then they were like, Madam, we get loans from HELB, so we are sorted. But I was saying there's a larger political principle, which should be that everybody should get a university education for free. Hey, that idea was not even in their radar. And that's a reflection of the fact that they are not as intellectually engaged as they used to be in the 80s and 70s. Yeah.
And so then you've mentioned something, and I want us to talk about that. What are some of the nuances we are seeing across the continent? So, for example, South African universities appear to have students that are more politically engaged, more politically aware. On our side of town, as you're saying, they just want the certificate. Or they come in with very, I don't want to call them pedestrian, but sometimes that's how they sound.
Yes.
When I was in the classroom, I remember my students coming to engage me about the boy child, the boy child conversation. And I was asking them, are you talking about yourselves, or are you talking about boys who are children? Because you are in your 20s now. You're not children.
Yes.
And for them, they were like, oh, come to think of it, I'm not even. So what are we talking about? So why are we seeing this disconnect from Southern Africa, for example, and maybe Eastern Africa?
That's a question I've been asking myself. Okay, this is my theory, and I'd like to hear what you think. I think it goes to our colonialisms, how they worked out. Kenya was a settler colony for the wealthy. The aristocrats who got land in Nanyuki and those areas.
Yeah.
And in the school system, we had these Oxbridge people, public school people. In fact, Kenya had some figure was like 60% of colonial officers and missionaries were from the public school system. These Eatons and
Yes,
all
from
that.
From Eton College in those ones, yes.
So there was a certain class thing that I think we got that South Africa didn't get. And in fact, even when the Boers were coming after they lost the war, some Boers were coming here.
They came here. Actually,
yeah, some soldiers also who had, English soldiers who had fought there also came here. Those people were not allowed to place in places like Nanyuki. There was class segregation.
Wow.
Even in among white people. So Nanyuki was for the aristocrats, and then these other areas were for middle class. And then I think Western Eldoret, Boers, all that kind of thing. So there was segregation even amongst the whites themselves.
Settlers, yeah.
So I think because of that, Africans were at the complete bottom. We didn't have mines and factories where you have a working class developing a consciousness.
Yes.
Except, maybe the workers at the docks, railway workers, those. But you see, those are people who are employed by the system. So I think we didn't get we didn't develop our working class consciousness. It didn't develop. It was there. I'm not saying it was not there. Of course, people like Shiraz Durrani have talked about it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't strong enough, and we got independence before it was developed. South Africa is different because that consciousness of capitalism and the way it works had started developing when the mines were there.
Yes.
And then, the Boers and the English fought. So my theory is that South Africans were able to develop a class political consciousness.
Yeah.
We didn't, because immediately people went to the forest to fight independence. But because Britain had more economic interests in South Africa, they stayed longer, which means that Black South Africans had a longer time to develop a class consciousness, a politics, an ideology. So you have people
and
like
a vernacular to go with it.
And a vernacular to go with it. We don't have that even till today. We don't have that vernacular. People say decolonizing the mind, but it's not working. It's not working. It's very academic.
And even within academia, I find that the Kenyan exposition around decolonization being very shallow.
Yes, was extremely shallow.
It's very shallow.
Yeah. So we remained at the culture conversation. We didn't talk about politics and economics. And the few who race. Yeah, that's a good one. And race. And the few who tried were immediately bundled out of the university system. So that's our problem. And it's now starting to show up in the kind of conversations our students have. They're not able to have very technical conversations that would help them move the conversations forward. It's a very big weakness of Kenya, and so sad. Yeah.
I don't know about South Africa. I also think the problem with Kenya is that the soft arm of colonialism, which was the church, played a big role in sort of co-opting Africans very quickly into accepting the colonial enterprise. So you had to drop your native name and get an English name for you to go to school, for example. And because the school system, as you're saying, has been the one of the ways in which we believe we can only get out of poverty, then it means that we very quickly accepted small things like I can get an English name for me to go to school, because when I go to school, I'll finish, I'll get my degree, I'll get a job. There were days I think people used to be poached when they were in the university in third year. Before they even finish, you already have a job.
Standard 4 even. My mom tells me at Standard 4, you could be taken into nursing training.
What?
Yeah, in the colonial, just before independence. Yeah.
So I think the soft arm of the church as a core conspirator of colonialism, I think for us, did a number on us. And that is why you even hear things in the public domain, people saying it's okay to suffer because, it is but for a small time. We are sojourners in the world. all those things, but in a way that has been twisted to say that we will accept oppression, we will accept mediocrity because we are waiting for a better life in heaven, in the afterlife, etc., which I think is a corruption of what that is supposed to mean.
I think it's more than there's also a structural problem.
Yeah.
Because I've now started studying it because I'm like, what is this? The government has, since independence, it's basically left education to the churches. So the churches are the single biggest provider of schools.
Of schools, yes.
So I don't know how that compares with the government, but I hear even government schools are not increasing that much. So there's an agreement between the government and the church that the church will provide the schools. Me, I've been saying, because I'm a Christian, I've been saying, no, we are abetting corruption, we are abetting misrule. We need to get out of education and start pushing the government to provide schools. Yeah, it's not the role of the church to provide schools. But that theology of providing social services in addition to supplement the government. In fact, the church is the first NGO.
Yes.
So it has no incentive to have Kenyans be independent thinkers. It has a lot of say in what we study. The first thing the church, when CBC came, the first thing they did was to get the approval of NCCK and such bodies, which they got. Philosophy also has been crushed. It's controlled mainly by the Catholic Church. So you find that most philosophers were either priests or you were initially training to be priests. So there are many other aspects of the problem of the church in education besides just brute religion. There's also the fact that Kenyans can't raise money for a school. We have no institutions really. So if a village is going to get money to raise a school, normally they will raise the money at
Through the church. Yeah.
So there are all these structural problems that also need to be studied so that we can get a comprehensive view of why the church seems to be having such a stranglehold on education. Yeah.
And I suppose it also goes back to the beginning of this conversation where the original universities were actually, if you think about Oxford. Oxford in the 800 AD was a monk's outpost.
Yes.
And then these monks were the scholars. They're the ones who were transcribing the Bible and doing all these things. And then suddenly it now grows into this scholastic place, and then it grows into this university. Same thing with Cambridge. Same thing, I think, with even the university, St. Andrews and all this, are all gathered around the idea of the church being in bed with the state, or in their case, the monarchy.
Yeah.
And I think we've just transferred that model.
Yes, we have.
Which at colonialism and post-colonialism, we've just transferred that model, and that is what is continuing. Which then comes to the university. Are we seeing the same model in the university system? Are the churches in the university, or it's just the politicians? Before now we come to what the student experience is at the university.
Again, they're the ones who are building more universities. I think now almost all the big denominations have a university. What complicates it now is capitalism.
Yeah.
Because capital has become the bigger influencer of university education, especially in the US and the UK, than the church. And of course, the church has no clue what's going on. They think if we just add more religion to the curriculum, things are going to work.
Everybody's going to be moral. And
it's
the
not
moral
going
fabric.
to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. But now what has happened is the input of capital. So we are listening to donors a lot, whether it's through the IMF or the grants that we are getting from these philanthropic organizations that are linked to the billionaires and all that.
And governments and
governments,
former colonial governments.
Yeah. So what is worse for me, at least I think, is that the influence is still the same as the way it was under the church, but it's not as visible because you see, when people talk about God, our antennae goes up.
Yes.
But now when they are talking about standards, people are like, yeah,
that
it's
makes
standards,
sense. That
world
makes sense.
class, quality. That's the new religion.
Yeah.
And because we are not sensitized to it, then now we are not seeing it. I have kept telling Kenyans that the religion has been secularized in the university. We are using the same system of communication that there has to be control from the West, approval, all that within knowledge systems. But now we are not using the language of God. We are using the language of standards.
Standards.
Yeah, and quality and what. Until we understand that, we are not going to see what the problem is. Yeah. And you see, like for me, because I'm a Christian, I know that language. I can see it. Even when somebody doesn't say God, I can see. You're talking about God. In fact, somebody said our God is capital.
Yes.
The market has become God.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the language is still the same. It's just that because God is not being mentioned, people think it has changed. But we are still in the same matrix of power, of the West controlling not just what we know, but the reasons for which we know it. The philosophy and the spirituality is still very controlled.
Yeah. You've spoken about the IMF, and I'm glad we are going down that route. The IMF and the World Bank.
Yeah.
We know that originally, across the continent, during the 80s, with the structural adjustment programs, this is when IMF, World Bank started coming in and saying, why is education free? Why are people being given boom? Why is this and this happening? Why are meals free? And now capitalism becomes the model that is embraced in the university.
Yeah.
And of course, the result of that is that fees goes up and we see all these things. How is that looking like now in the new IMF dispensation?
Yeah.
Because I'm aware Kenya, I think Ghana, Nigeria, and a couple of other countries, we're in a new IMF dispensation now. More austerity measures being put in place in the university. Higher education is being defunded. Fees are going up. What are we seeing the students doing in terms of movements? Because we had the student movements in the 80s and 90s. What's happening now? What's going on?
You see, we didn't develop a political vernacular for understanding the base of what's the issue.
Okay.
So in the 70s to the 90s, Kenyan student politics was about Kenya, governance, opposition to oppression and all that.
Multi-party politics.
Yeah, multi-party politics. So they never developed a language of what's in the curriculum. Okay, in the 70s, some people were saying, why are we being taught, especially the social sciences were controlled by the Rockefellers and those NGOs. But it didn't become a vernacular of saying our what we are learning is also political. We never developed that language because our students were nationally focused. So in the 90s, now when they start hitting at in the interior of the university, there was no movement. We were captured. We were just captured just like that. Nobody asked about help. Why should we be getting loans? Even when I started asking in the 2015s, what are the conditions for the loans? Students are just saying, oh, we can't get employed without the clearance certificate, which means, how are we accepting these things and we are not saying anything, that this is a national problem? So we don't have a language to bring these things up. Then when the EU started coming to control standards, quality, I raised those questions among us university people. I was like, why are we accepting these things? So I was
the
told,
ISO certifications and all those things,
and the Bologna process and certification, and the EU was in our business on that thing. They were taking lecturers abroad for months. Administrators, they were taking them abroad for months. They brought in a system where now we have to hire people just to make sure the regulations. I asked, what is this? I mean, why is this being externally determined? I said, oh, no, we want to be world class, like the universities abroad. When I start telling them, but these are the politics happening even in Europe, nobody wants to hear. So basically what has happened is that matters of education are not being discussed in the university. It is so bizarre. It's so strange to me that this is our calling, this is our profession, and we are not talking about what are we doing. The conversation is not there. That's why I came to social media. I was like, hey, if nobody's going to talk with me about this within the university system, let me come out and start talking about it. So I'm sorry to say, the way I see it, nobody really cares within the university ecosystem, whether it's students, whether it's lecturers. I don't think people are caring about that. They're talking about the bigger, they're hustling. They want to get money from consultancies and all that. The other thing that happened with Kenya that maybe South Africa might not have is this ideology of we don't need to think, what we need is to make money. And because we are desensitized to racism in Kenya, we can't see how racist that narrative is. And we can't think beyond, what does it mean if we are not thinking? I mean, if an education minister, CS, is going to the public, he has a PhD, and he's saying we need an education system that has no knowledge, only skills. I mean, what are we saying?
Yeah.
What are we saying? And yet this is accepted as normal. But I think South Africa has a longer tradition of political consciousness, of having these conversations about what are we learning, who is interested in our minds. You have the Steve Bikos, who were university students asking those questions. So among Black South African students, they understand the political impact of them being in university. They understand, like they were saying with the fees must fall, they understand that they deserve to be there. They need to learn. And it's important for them politically to have people going to university and learning. We don't have that consciousness in Kenya. It's for us, it's about jobs. And if you try to expand that conversation, nobody bites. So you just shout in the wind and hope that one day our grandchildren will hear what we are saying.
Which is quite unfortunate, because the fees must fall conversation in South Africa was quite impactful. We had a similar fees must fall here a month or so ago. I'm not quite sure how that is going currently.
There was no principle. You see, that there has to be a principle, a philosophical principle of saying our children deserve education. Why are we paying for it? That's what fees must fall was saying.
About,
In Kenya, we are debating the fees, how high they are.
How high should they be?
Could help us here. Now.
Oh my God.
Now, when we are starting with the costs, then we've lost it. It's going to be very easy for a politician to say, okay, we are reviewing the system. We are going to appoint a 169
which is exactly what happened. Exactly what happened.
We are going to look into it. So you people just go, we'll figure out how we can fund this thing. So once you start discussing the formula for the fees, you've lost the argument.
Lost the argument. Right. And how then do our students separate themselves from not the politics, the politicians? Because I feel every movement, especially in the universities, is very quickly co-opted. Even in the Kenyan public, we had the June protests, for example, the finance bill protests, and they became very quickly co-opted. By the political class, which is now why we have a broad-based government and all these kinds of things. We the fees must fall has been co-opted by a committee of 169 people that are still sitting, and they might sit for a year. There's no timeline for when they need to come back and say, we don't want fees in the universities, right? So how then do students separate themselves Or how do students begin an alternative way of protesting that is not easily co-opted? And I suppose that's a wider question of how then do we as Kenyans, as Africans, begin to have alternative channels of communicating our displeasure, of protesting that is not very quickly co-opted. Because I don't know if this is a Kenyan problem or an African problem, we are very easily co-opted by the political class, into silence, into, of course, there's the violence and all that, but we're very quickly co-opted into silence and into maintaining the status quo. Yeah.
That is a question I keep asking myself. Oh dear. I think, okay, the way I see Kenya, our weakness is that we don't value and we don't respect knowledge. Yes. So what happens is that now when you start saying the people are being co-opted, it becomes about personalities.
Yeah.
So-and-so was very loud at this time, then he became co-opted. So-and-so was very loud at this time, now they have a job. And we are not understanding that the system actually thrives on this. It's not on the co-opting, on the energy. They love the energy. Because if we are all quiet, they start to wonder what's going on. If there's no enthusiasm and no resistance, politicians would be very uncomfortable, by the way. Eh? They would be very uncomfortable. So these spots of resistance, they love that because it energizes them. So they co-opt it quick. They harvest. Actually, that's what we should be saying. They're harvesting the energy. They keep going to places, harvesting the energy that keeps the government alive. So you see, every time you co-opt a resistance, you look like you're responding to the people, which helps your legitimacy.
Right.
I think we've not understood that action philosophically. We've not understood that politicians need our energy. And every time we start to arise, they harvest. They're harvesting the way you harvest fruits from a farm. They're harvesting it. So they're harvesting all these energies. And that's why every time there's a resistance, you see MPs at the place of protest.
Yes.
MPs are at the courts.
Yes.
It's because they need that energy
to
legitimize themselves. I think that's what we have not understood. Because when we see politicians coming, we think they are coming to support us. They understand our struggle. They are going to go and represent us in parliament. No. They are coming they're coming to launder themselves.
I'd never thought about it that way, actually. And that's why you see even MPs who, even currently, Kenyan MPs who are facing resistance in their home countries, in their home counties and areas, they're coming back to say, as a leader, we now need more protection because they're our political enemies. So in creating political enemies, they're actually legitimizing themselves.
Yeah.
Because every legitimate person must stand in this moral code of, I will have people who will resist me because I'm working.
Yeah. And you see, it's very easy to tap into people's energy and then twist it. Because you're not allowing them to think. You see, you're not allowing them to settle down long enough to think and ask, what is this system we have? Do we want to talk to the MP? Next time when he comes, what do we tell him? You don't allow that to happen. You harvest the energy immediately. So in fact, I was wondering, people told you not to, and I'm not justifying the DP, but the MPs from that area were told, we are not supporting this thing. They went to parliament and did what the people didn't want.
Exactly.
Yani, they come the next day back home. What audacity is that?
Yeah.
What audacity is that? It's the energy. Because they need to tap into it and twist it quickly before the people settle down and think, by the way, what was this about? What does it mean for us? What do we do going forward? Do we need this MP? When he comes, what do we... Before people have had time to think about it, the MP is back trying to persuade people.
So a creation of drama.
You create so much drama, people never settle down to ask questions. That's what happened. That's what's happening in Kenya.
Right.
We never ask questions. We are so busy saying who was co-opted, who went here, who got a job here. But when
who has been pictured somewhere talking to politicians?
When do we sit down and say, okay, this is what we did? What were the weaknesses? What were the strengths? What are the gaps we noticed? What do we do going forward?
And that's how we produce knowledge.
And that's how we
experience
produce
something, you come sit down, you analyze it, and then you come away with a learning, a vernacular, something, an ideology.
Yes. Yeah. That is not happening in Kenya. The politicians are very good. Let me just say, power to them. They're so good at making sure that work doesn't happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of NGOs, embassies that are helping.
With the narrative.
Yeah.
And they've done the same thing in the universities, even with the student protests in the universities. I mean, a good example is Moi University, for example.
Yeah.
Which was doing very well. I went to Moi University for my first degree.
The literature department.
I was in the literature department.
I think that's a powerhouse on its own. And the medicine and
exactly.
Yeah.
But then suddenly you have politicians coming in and saying, this is our village, this is our area university. We cannot have someone who is not our own leading this university. So even going as far as saying that the leadership of, they were legitimizing themselves in many ways, because especially the leaders who were doing that, creating that drama to center themselves.
Yeah.
And in many ways attack the then vice chancellor who was sitting there.
Yeah.
Ended up removing him. And now we see where Moi University is. Student protests. I was seeing the other day in the news, students being tear gassed through the doors, those metal doors, and that space where you put in your hand. Like the policemen were throwing tear gas into the tiny houses through those tiny holes, shooting at students who were not even in the protests itself. They were hiding in their rooms. And this in many ways is the status of the African university. Now we have policemen walking around, even in our schools during exams, with guns.
Yes.
We have policemen in the university now as part of the security apparatus, armed. In the place where I worked, there's a time the vice chancellor's armed security men nearly knocked me down because I hadn't seen him. This is just the university corridor.
Yeah.
You don't expect to bump into a vice chancellor. And all of a sudden, he's in front of me. I'm like, oh, how are you, Professor? And his bodyguard nearly slapped me and pushed me.
What?
It took him saying, no, don't. Because of course I was dressed with my dreadlocks and my jeans. I think he thought I was a student. Which doesn't
but even then.
Yeah. It was like, no. This is one of the faculty. And I really thought that is very strange. Now we have armed policemen walking around in the universities. We have police coming in, not just Moi University. We had Multimedia University. I've seen universities in the ongoing protests against bad governance in Nigeria. I'm just saying armed. We now, we've normalized having policemen everywhere. If you go to the Central Business District right now, you're likely to find policemen seated in a lorry, parked in a corner, just sitting.
Yeah.
So that, in many ways, is the status of the African university, besieged from all corners, very poor leadership. But then it's not even about the leadership, and it's about the entire system. So that now brings us to the other conversation. Is it possible, and I believe it's possible, to create an alternative to the university system? And how does that look like?
We must. We have no option. We must create an alternative, because even the universities are so lethargic, they will not listen if you're just opposing them directly. But when they see there's an alternative, they'll start to rethink what they are doing. So we need an alternative. I think the first important thing is to recenter thinking. In Kenya, people say thinking has no use to the market.
It's theoretical.
They want practical. Yeah. How is it going to help Mama Mboga? All that. So the first thing is to have thinking communities, sustained thinking communities. People who say, we don't have an immediate goal in sight, but we are going to sit even if it's once a month, every once of a month, we are going to come and we are going to read something. We are going to talk about an idea, and we're not going to look for a solution. In fact, that solution thing has really killed. It has killed thinking in Kenya. Because what happens is that every time you start to talk about something,
a problem, you're told, what is your solution?
What is your solution? How do we go to Watu Mashinani? It starts now becoming about operations. Can we get a donor? Can we?
Yes.
So there have to be thinking communities who say, like Paulo Freire,
Yes,
that education is open-ended. It's about problem posing. It's about defining the problems and putting in the time and the effort to think about things. That has to be done. It has to be done. There's no way around it. And then from there, then now you can build sustained communities of having students. I think that that's where we need to start going. That we need to start having students who are going to come and read, and they know that they may stay with us trying to think, but there might be no jobs.
There might be no, I don't know if there'll be certificates.
There'll be no certificates, but we should hopefully convince them that by thinking we are able to understand what is wrong with the economy. And by understanding what is wrong with the economy, then we can break through the ceilings and start to establish things. It's that process that is going to be very difficult to convince Kenyans because for them, thinking is a waste of time. What does Mama Mboga have to do with Paulo Freire? That kind of
and that's a very I've seen that question on social media.
Yeah.
And I find it very interesting because one of the things that Paulo Freire said in the pedagogy of the oppressed was that one of the things that capitalism has done to us, because what it does is that it reduces us to numbers and values.
Yeah.
You have a PhD, you're probably over there. If someone doesn't have a PhD, they're probably at a lower rank. And so it places values, arbitrary values on us.
Yes.
And one of the things he argues for is that our moving away from oppression means returning our dignity as human beings.
Yes.
Moving away from seeing you in your number value into seeing you as a human being.
Yeah.
And that is a very relevant conversation for Mama Mboga. You remember the other day when Uber drivers were on strike?
Yeah.
My argument was that if you see the Uber driver as your oppressor, you're going to enter his taxi and argue with him and you'll have a fight.
Yeah.
But if you enter that taxi and see him and yourself as members of an oppressed class, he has been dehumanized. He's doing that to you because he's dehumanized.
Yes.
The amount of money that Uber is taking from him, he's unable to pay the car loan, he's unable to feed himself.
Yeah.
If you see yourself as he is oppressing you, other than to see yourself as you are oppressed because he's oppressed.
Yeah.
Which means the two of you are a member of the oppressed class.
Yeah.
You now begin to ask yourselves, as a collective, who is oppressing us? And so your fight becomes against the oppressor, not against the Uber driver, who is simply dehumanized. And of course, you feel he's dehumanizing you because he's also dehumanized.
Yeah.
How do we begin these conversations of returning humanity to the heart of our humanness? So thinking communities. And I really like that you're calling them thinking communities, because with the June protests in Kenya and the ongoing protest in Nigeria, I'm seeing calls across the continent for thinking communities. How do we gain vernaculars, even within academia, to say, this is the oppression that is ongoing.
Yeah.
We are centering it in this thinking space, in this philosophical space. And then once we now have those collective thinking spaces, we now begin to ask ourselves, what is the solution? But I can't ask the Uber driver, what is the solution?
I know.
His solution is to tell me, you're not going to pay me what is on you are paying me more. That is his solution.
Yes.
That's not it's not an enduring solution. So I really like that idea of thinking communities. We have to start thinking.
Yes.
Theorizing, in short.
Yes.
Which is what we don't want. We just want very quick fix solutions. We go and say the problem with the university is not the vice chancellor. The vice chancellor is corrupt. If we bring in a more morally upright vice chancellor, president, MP, the system
It
will change. But we've seen the system co-opting everybody who thinks they're moral. So then that alternative to the
And then we have to recognize the system that blocks those alternatives. I think that's also the work we have not done. And it's a work that that's what I do.
Yeah.
I look at how are we blocked from thinking. One is those ideologies, Mama Mboga, how is she affected, whatever. That one is common, but the thing is, it's everywhere. People have to recognize it, especially in the media.
Yes.
The media does it all the time. The second thing we are not allowed to do is to interpret reality. If you look at what the media does, and this is, I now learned from my painful experience talking about CBC, they ask you the same questions for 3 years. You answer it today, tomorrow you come, you're asked again. Next year you come again, you're asked the same question. Basically, what is happening is that we are being told you can't move beyond where you are.
Yeah.
So we have to recognize those things. The third one is now the brain drain.
Yes.
The fact that we are being told to go out. To leave. And there's also an ecosystem of spotting good leaders and giving them fellowships and scholarships and all that. Even the funding of the hubs and all that ecosystem is also draining ideas, because what happens is, especially when it's anyone below 35, I'm sorry, if you're being given a good opportunity to go out, it's because somebody is harvesting your energy. I think that's what we don't see. We think it's, I've got an opportunity, I'm going to develop, but it's our energy being harvested, our innovation being harvested, so that by the time you're hitting 40, 45, man, your energy has gone. You don't have the energy. You have kids who are in high school. You have to think of, life has moved on.
Yes.
You don't have the energy to think as quickly on your feet as you did when you were younger. So we need to understand the ecosystem of blocking our ideas, because it is so entrenched. And then, of course, you go to the churches. The church is another one. Even within the church, I'm always telling clergy, for people who don't like the church, this is not funny, but I'm always telling the clergy, you people are not thinking. How can you have faith that you don't think about?
That's true.
But even then, there's an ecosystem of making sure that doesn't happen. And one of the things they did was to kill theology and replace it with biblical studies.
Biblical studies, yeah.
So you're not interpreting, you're just learning, does the Bible say? Then you go and preach.
And you go with inspiration and anointing and all that, yeah.
But you don't ask, what does God say about neoliberalism?
Absolutely.
You never ask that question.
Yeah.
So, and that's also happening in the academy. If you look at almost all the subjects, I've talked about them on our channel, Maisha Kazini.
Yeah.
We've talked about education is the one that is absolutely annoying, because most of the scholarship is on commission this, commission the other, system change here, system change the other, ILO report. There's no scholarship saying, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing? Yeah. Conservation, Dr. Ogada talks about that all the time.
Yeah.
Philosophy is just almost non-existent. Theology, I've already said. So this suppression of thought is happening across the disciplines. All of them are stuck in this mode of, let's talk about UNESCO, constitutions. It's all documents, Bible. It's what Ogada called document-centered knowledge.
Yes.
So we are always referring to UNESCO, ILO, World Bank, WHO for medicine.
Yes.
We are always referring to outside documents and not saying, what do we think? What did our revolutionaries say about these issues?
Yeah.
We are not doing that work. So that's a work that has to be done in the thinking communities, because it's not going to happen in the university. Now I've accepted.
You've accepted.
10 years ago, I was like, let's try. Well, now I've just accepted. It's not going to happen. So people have to commit to do this work without an end in sight. That's
the end being a job, the end being
a project.
A project, yeah.
Yeah, that one, let me just say right now, the way I see Kenya, Yeah, I don't know whether they understand the importance of that work.
I have hope. I've
Okay,
seen more
it's
and more
important.
calls. I've seen more and more calls,
Oh,
especially in the
okay.
wake of June 25th and the
Yes.
protests, with a lot of people saying we need to sit and ask and think and ask ourselves,
Yeah.
what kind of Kenya do we want? And in this Kenya, do we have a police? Do we have and what are they doing? What is the philosophy behind the police?
Yeah.
Do we need the church? Do we need government? Do we need governors? I've seen those conversations going on, and I have hope. I think the ages and the things they bring are there to wake us up. But I also like that work has already been done. I always tell people, don't try and reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
There is work.
Yeah.
There is work on your channel, Maisha Kazini, which is on YouTube, it's on SoundCloud. The people have been doing the work. So the work is there. We don't have to start afresh. We need just to find out what have people been doing. And they might have been few. Then we start creating that critical mass. If people are going to be using whatever channel, whatever, I think there's a model that we can follow. Models already exist.
Yeah.
But I feel confident that we are now beginning to reach a place where we are creating a critical mass where we'll even follow you and start, another Maisha Kazini, which is not Maisha Kazini, talking about other things. And then we are now thinking together. We are thinking collectively. I have hope. I have hope for the continent. I think Gen Z have given me that hope.
Yes,
They've
actually,
given me that hope.
when the protest started, I was like, yeah, it's going to happen.
It's happening
in my lifetime.
Yes.
Because before that, I was just like, I don't know. I'm just going to plant the seed and hopefully it will be seen.
And I think that is important work, the planting of the seeds, because as the seeds grow, we are getting fruit, we are getting more seed.
Yes.
And it's not GMO. Those GMO seeds that don't self-propagate. So I feel that you've done the work and many other people that have come before us have been doing the work. I feel like we're beginning to see, this is what she actually meant when she was talking about ABCD, beginning to connect the dots. So I feel hopeful. I think you've even at some point suggested an alternative in terms of the university.
I'm thinking
Can we
about
have
it.
A place where people go and study theory and study different forms of knowledge that is not in the university?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it.
I can see you thinking about it. Yes. And I have hope that there's a critical mass of people saying that is what is required.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have hope. I think I have hope. Yeah. Maybe this is a good place to end our discussion today.
Yes.
On hope, yes.
Yes.
But I want the parting shot to be what you've said. We need more knowledge. We need thinking to engage in more thinking, more theory, more knowledge to allow us to gain the vernacular and the capacities to see where we are before we start saying, what is your solution?
Yeah.
We need to sit ourselves and ask ourselves, where are we now? Why are we here? What does it mean for us now?
Yes.
And then we start asking ourselves, what then can we do going forward? I really like that as, that is my parting shot of hope. We need more thinking. I completely agree.
Yeah, hope is important. It has been difficult for me to articulate what hope is because, again, Kenyans have been desensitized to the emotional, spiritual side of our lives.
Yes.
So they think, how does hope put food on the table? That's how we talk. But hope is what keeps you going.
Yeah.
Hope is the knowledge that my story is incomplete, which is what Freire says. Where I am today, it doesn't have to always be like this. There can be a better tomorrow. I think that's what we need to really beef up. And maybe even me, that's something I have to keep remembering because I lose hope so many times. But I think if I ever get to start that alternative learning space, it will be my expression of hope that it doesn't have to be the way it is now.
Yeah.
We can do better. And we just need to work with the assurance that it can happen. Yeah. Unfortunately, the language I know for that is religious. But maybe also part of what has happened with religion is that it has captured that language. It has made it exclusive.
Or religion in itself has been captured, politicized.
Yes.
and been used to dehumanize us. And so
Yes.
people feel very alienated with
Yeah.
religion and
Yeah.
spiritual practice, which is
Yes.
not how it should be.
It's not
I
how it should
feel
be.
spiritual practice anchors the human spirit,
Yes.
the human soul,
and our knowledge.
and the knowledge as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, that's the anchor.
Yeah.
So maybe that is also part of what we need to think.
Mhm.
As we sit and think, we need to sit and think about that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's been a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so
to
much.
hear from you. I think we are really privileged and lucky in many ways to have people like a voice like yours in the academic space, in the social media space, in the spiritual space, speaking to us in this moment and planting those seeds. I think in your lifetime, you'll see some of these seeds, as you say, we started with talent as a seed. I think in your lifetime, you'll see some of these seeds grow into tall trees. I think you will. So thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure
and I'll
to
take
have you
that
with us.
as a blessing also.
Yes.
An expression of hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Prof. Asante.
Thank you.
And to our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next Mawazo Ideas podcast episode.